I just want to say that when all this happened, I was 18 and I was young, innocent and naive. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, I would never let this happen again. It was my freshman year at college, and as usual, one would imagine I was excited to be on my own for once in my life. So excited about this prospect, I decided I was going to take summer classes on campus. That way I wouldn't have to worry about coming in when the big crowd of freshmen came, and I would also already know where everything was. Plus it meant I could get away from my parents faster. But mainly all I could think about was the boys. You see, I never dated anyone through high school, so I thought I would find my one true love at college, because of course that's what all the movies told me. About 2 weeks go by, and me and one of my roommates, I had 4, were hanging out in the lounge area, showing off pictures from Instagram of our friends and family, etc. Well, my roommate, I'll call her Tracy, showed me a picture of her and these 2 guys. One of the guys was Tracy's boyfriend, and the other was Tracy's boyfriend's best friend. I'll call him Sean. Now Sean was very attractive, and I told Tracy that he was hot. She told me that he went to the tech college near us, and he was single. A day or 2 goes by after this, and she told me that she'd told Sean that I was interested in him, and he wanted to know if he could follow me on Instagram so he could DM me. At that time I trusted Tracy, because she seemed like a cool, chill girl, so I excitedly told her yes. But I wish I had never told her this. I talked to Sean for about a week before I was comfortable enough to give him my phone number. At first he seemed super sweet. He would always send me a text message in the morning, telling me to have a good day at class, and how he couldn't wait to FaceTime me that night. And we would FaceTime every night. At first I loved it because I never had a boy give me so much attention, and like I said before, I had never dated anyone, so I was just over the moon that he was even interested enough in me to talk to me. But it quickly started to get annoying. He would text me almost every second of the day, and tried to FaceTime me at least 4 times. When I wouldn't respond to him, he would ask if I was okay, why wasn't I answering him, or if I was seeing another guy. If I was seeing another guy, it would make him really mad. I, of course, once seeing the messages, would try to reassure him I was okay and I wasn't seeing anyone. Like I said in the beginning, I was young and naive, so I didn't see it as a red flag. But things kept going downhill from there. It came to a point where he started asking for pictures of me. Either just selfies or pictures of me in the mirror. I wouldn't send them though, because I wasn't comfortable, and he would brush it off, saying that he was fine and I could send him pictures of myself whenever I was ready. One day I was in class for a long time, because it was a lab, and it started at 7 p.m. and wouldn't end until 10 p.m. that night. For those of you who don't know, labs in college can last from 2 to 4 hours, and mine just happened to be 3 hours that night. Once class had ended, I headed up to my dorm and took out my phone. I clicked the button on the side, lighting up the screen. I had 380 unread texts, 10 missed calls, and 3 voicemails from Sean. Before I could even react or even read all the messages, my phone started to ring. But instead of it being Sean, it was my dad. He called me to make sure I was all right, because he got an alert from the phone company that I had gotten all those messages. I was still on his phone plan. I don't know why, but I lied to him and laughed it off, saying that I was just in a group chat with a bunch of girls from school. Once I got off the phone with my dad, I quickly went to look at the messages I had gotten. Most of them were demanding why I wasn't answering him, and he would come and find me if I didn't. The voicemails were crude, and mostly of him saying how he was going to find me. And when he did, he was going to punish me for not answering him. After this, I just completely blocked him on everything I could think of, completely freaked out about the whole thing. About a week went by, and I started to slowly forget about the incident, trying not to think much about it. At least that's what I was trying to do. That whole week I felt like someone was watching me, but but I brushed it off as me being paranoid. At the end of the week, my roommate Tracy, who I had been avoiding, came up to me, shouting at me and saying how I broke Sean's heart, and he had been calling her crying, saying he didn't understand why I stopped talking to him. I couldn't even get a word in because of how fast she was talking. She finally called me a self-centered bitch and walked away. I went to class right after that, not realizing I'd forgotten to lock my dorm room. You see, I lived with 4 girls, and each girl had their own room, which would lock from the outside with a key. Well, when I came back from class, I noticed my door was cracked open slightly. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hesitated going in. My hands were shaking terribly, but I finally got the nerve to push it open. Nothing. There was nothing out of place, it seemed. Even though there was nothing out of place, I could have sworn I'd closed the door before leaving for class. Although I don't remember if I locked it or not. I know for sure I closed the door. So I asked my roommates, including Tracy, if anyone had gone into my room today. And they all denied it, even Tracy. But I just knew in my heart someone had been in there. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So one weekend, when I knew that all my roommates were going to be out of town, I switched dorm buildings and roomed with a girl I had gotten to be close friends with. After I moved in with her, I told her all that had happened, and she said that she would walk with me to my classes, which we thankfully had most together, except the night lab that I had, and she would walk with me to my lab and wait until it was done to walk with me back to the dorm. But on one particular night, she had gone out of town to see her parents. I was walking back from my lab, and it had gotten really late that night again. I heard someone walking behind me, but I didn't pay any attention to it, since class was just let out. But as I was walking, I could hear the steps getting closer, so I started to pick up my walking speed. At this point I could tell someone was following me, and I was too afraid to look back. As the footsteps increased and got faster, I started running as fast as I could. Now, I'm not athletic by any means. Somehow, though, adrenaline probably, I was able to sprint to my dorm building, hearing someone still running behind me, and I thankfully already had my keycard out to get into the building quickly. I swiped it on the door and slammed it behind me. Looking up from slamming the door, I could see someone who was probably about 10 feet away, staring at me. Even though through the person's hoodie that was up, I couldn't see their face, but I was certain they were looking at me, and I knew it was Sean. Not wasting any more time, I went to the RA that was up that night, bawling, telling him what had just happened. He called the police and I told them everything. But they basically said they couldn't do anything, since I didn't see his face. Even if I thought it was Sean, and maybe I was just paranoid since it was the night time and I was walking by myself. After all this, I called my friend and told her what had happened, and she never went out of town again if I had my late-night classes. I eventually decided college wasn't for me and I dropped out. I moved back to my home state and went to cosmetology school and became a hairdresser. I still haven't dated anyone yet, though. Maybe it's the fear of something like that happening again. I don't know. Though I do know that I'm super careful with who I talk to now and who I give my social media and phone number to. I'm still scared to go to places by myself, even though it's been years and I'm states away. But even so, Sean, let's not ever meet again. So when I was 15, I was completely incorrigible and hung out with some not so great people. My main friend group would hang out at this house that we dubbed our house. Now, our house was technically a foreclosed property that had previously been owned by one of my friend's parents. The parents had moved out and left their 2 adult children, who were the siblings of my friend's age, living at the house. Every single day after school, my friends and I would meet up with the older siblings at our house and get absolutely hammered. Around 4 p.m, everyone would just show up with fifths and drugs, and it was just a constant party every night. Things got pretty out of control there. One particular night, we were all drunk as usual, and I got in a fight with my boyfriend. I decided I wanted to leave, but no one would drive me home, and the buses had stopped running. It was late, probably 12 or 1 a.m, and I lived 6 miles away. This was an urban area that was sketchy to walk through at night, but I was angry and drunk, so I told everyone to go away, for want of a better phrase, and I left. I got 3/4 of the way home without incident, and I hadn't seen a single car or person. While I was kind of scared, I was feeling more confident the closer I got to home. As I was crossing the freeway overpass that glides down into the valley where my neighborhood is, all of a sudden I heard a whirring noise and see lights coming from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a bus coming up beside me. The destination mark was blank, and the lights inside were dim. I turned away and kept walking, and as the bus got closer, it slowed down and drove right next to me. This went on for maybe 30 seconds, when I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable, and glanced up. The bus then stopped, and the driver opened the door. He wasn't wearing a uniform. I still remember him really clearly. 50-something, salt and pepper hair, medium length for a man, a thick, darker grey beard, and copper wire-rimmed glasses. He leant against the driver's wheel and looked me up and down. "You look really young," he said. And I, like an idiot, stuttered that I was 15, thinking, like most 15-year-olds, that 15 isn't young. He smiled really slowly and said that this was a dangerous area to be walking alone, and there are all types of men out there. Why don't I get on the bus? Now, I may have been drunk, I may have been 15, and I may have been deludedly self-confident, but I wasn't stupid. Something just didn't feel right. I told him no thank you and quickly started walking again. For a while the bus behind me didn't move, but then I heard its brakes lift and it started creeping up behind me again. By this time I'm over the bridge and walking down a sidewalk with apartment complexes on either side. The bus pulled up again and opened its doors while following me. The driver again told me it's not safe and asks me to get on the bus. I told him no, as I was almost home. I started walking faster and he closed the doors, but kept in pace with me. Now I'm really starting to worry. Finally I decided to just run. I started running fast at first, so as to put some distance between myself and him. But he's still behind me. I then slowed down a bit when I felt far enough away, and I caught my breath but kept walking. The next thing I knew, the bus started gaining on me again and honked its horn. I screamed and fell over, still super drunk and now very scared. I quickly got up and scurried into the neighborhood at my side and hid behind one of the carports. I could still see the road and the bus had stopped again. Its doors opened and the man came to the doorway and looked out in both directions. He lingered there for a moment, and then I heard him curse. Then he got back to his seat, closed the doors and drove away. It took me another 30 minutes to get home, even though it was less than a mile at that point, because I took a convoluted way through bushes, yards and apartment complexes, terrified the bus was still cruising around looking for me. So, to that bus driver all those years ago, let's not meet again. Now my story won't be as scary or creepy as others, but I was petrified then, and I still am now, especially every time I see him on the street. I was 13 at the time. I had a group of friends who were really toxic. I won't go into too much detail, but I didn't really know what a healthy friendship was, as I didn't really have any real friends before that. One day, another 13-year-old lad, who we'll call Thomas, was targeted by my so-called friends. It was weird, because yes, they were always mean to me, but never to other people. I was, and still am in a way, the type of person who is okay with other people being mean with me, but as soon as they are with someone else, it makes me really angry. Thomas didn't live with his parents, so my friends decided to laugh at him for that. I felt I had to defend him, so I yelled at them. It was the first time that I had ever done this, and it made them angry, of course, but they still talked to me, even though I feel stupid for letting them. After that, I kind of became friends with Thomas, at least for one day. But the day after that, he surprisingly just told me that he was in love with me. That was the first time a boy had ever told me he was in love with me, and it felt really uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do, and I just said that I didn't know if I loved him and that he should ask me again later. I know it was stupid of me, and I still feel guilty about it, but I didn't really know what else to do. The day after that, he told me again that he loved me, and I gave him the same answer. It went on like that for a few days, but one day I just had to tell him that no, I didn't love him, and this made him very upset. He walked away, and I thought our friendship would be over from then on. But no. He came to me the next day and told me that he would make me love him. I just laughed awkwardly and didn't say anything, as I was a little shocked. Now this is where it all begins. At first, he would just come up to me and talk at me. I couldn't get away. It annoyed me, but I said nothing as he was alone and I still felt sorry for him. But then one morning he just showed up at my door and told me that from now on we will walk together to school. This scared me because I'd never told him where I live, but I just assumed that my friends had told him. This was not the case. When I asked them, they told me that they'd never talked to a guy like him and that I was stupid for talking to him. After that, I was always with him, literally. He knew when I finished my class and was always waiting for me to walk me back to my house. And every morning, even if he started earlier or later than me, he was there. He didn't even care if he was late to school. Once school was finished, I would just stay inside, as my friends would never invite me to go out with them, and I was scared to go out alone. But one day my cousin, who was a little bit older than me, invited me to go to the cinema with him. I agreed as we were very close. I don't know why, but I told Thomas about it. I guess because to any normal person mentioning this wouldn't be a problem. So I told him that I was really excited because I like my cousin a lot, and we hardly got time to spend together. He seemed really angry, and asked me if he could come too. I told him no, as I was already a little scared of him and always uncomfortable around him. So 2 days after that, it was time for me to go to the cinema, and when I got there, I saw Thomas standing against a wall. I naively thought it was just a coincidence. He saw me, smiled at me, and that was it. I went in, saw the movie, and when I got out of the cinema, he was still there. I said my goodbyes to my cousin, and I tried to get home quickly, but Thomas ran over to me and began talking to me like nothing weird was going on. He asked me how the movie was, what my cousin did, if I'll see him again soon, and if for me he was just someone from my family, or was he someone I was secretly in love with? He even said that he could take care of him for me. That last question really made me uncomfortable and freaked me out. I told him that he was just my cousin, and I would never fall in love with him, as that's just weird. Just before I made my way home, he asked me for my number. I said that I didn't remember it, which was true, and that I never give my number out to people, not even my friends. He started to yell at me, saying that I'd lied to him and that I just didn't want to give it to him, and then he walked away. The night after that, I received a text from him. He was saying sorry for yelling at me and that he wouldn't do it again. I asked him how he'd gotten my number, and he told me that it was none of my business. I didn't answer back to this and just went to sleep. When I woke up, he had sent me a lot of texts. The first few were really nice, and then they became meaner and meaner. He was insulting me because I wasn't answering him, so I felt guilty and asked him to forgive me. He did, and like always, we went to school together. He started to get really close to me as we were walking, and then, just like that, he asked me to go out with him again. I told him no, and he just started insulting me again, saying I was a slut for making him believe that I wanted to go out with him. At the time, I didn't really feel like I had a choice. He slapped me, and I started crying and yelling at him. The people in the street didn't even interfere, as I think they thought that it was just a fight between two kids. I walked the rest of the way to school alone, and I spent the day alone because of him. I didn't talk to my friends for days, because he wouldn't let me, and I could tell that they were angry at me because of it. I told the teacher that I didn't feel well, and they let me go home early, so Thomas wasn't waiting for me. He sent me a text asking where I was and why I was abandoning him. He said he was sorry and that he won't ever do it again. He loved me. I didn't answer, and I still feel guilty, but I was so scared of him. The next morning I set off for school way earlier than usual, just to avoid him. But of course, he found me and came to talk to me at break. He said sorry again, and I didn't answer. I just let him talk. My silence didn't seem to bother him, and he just carried on talking at me. After our walk home together, just like that, he kissed me. I pushed him away and told him that that was enough and that I was going to tell the teacher. Not very menacing, I know. He laughed a little and told me I was cute before saying goodbye. The next day I told my friends everything about what had been going on. Even if they were really mean to me, they were also very protective. I don't know why. They spoke to him, and I don't know what they told him, but after that he never talked to me again. He'd try, but when he'd see my friends, he would get out of there. And eventually he just gave up. Now I know it's not his fault. He was young. We were young. And he was alone, maybe even sad. And I don't blame him. I still feel guilty because I couldn't love him back. But I hope he's okay now, and I hope he's happy. That's all that really matters to me in the end. A few years back, my then boyfriend and I, a 22-year-old female, were living in a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, about a mile away from the coveted Larimer Square and tourist favourite 16th Street. The location was fantastic, but with people-dense areas often comes trouble. We lived in a historic house, with 4 townhouses next to one another, and this layout will become important to the story. All 4 front doors of these houses were aligned on a single porch. My apartment was located next to an alley and was the last door on the left. Now, due to a work obligation, my boyfriend was sent on a 3-month-long work assignment, leaving me alone in the house with our 2 dogs. This was no sweat off my back. After growing up in a small town in the northeast, I was eager to explore. My days after work were filled with long walks around the dog parks and exploring restaurants and craft breweries downtown. All was well until it wasn't. Being alone most of the time and raised in a town of 4,000 of my cousins, that's an exaggeration, but not really, I was docile and trusting. The worst combination. About a month into being alone in the city, I would come home to 3 men smoking outside my front door. The first encounter. I decided to keep walking and called a nearby friend to help me get into my house safely. I thought this was a one-time thing, but weeks later the men continually showed up, and it became routine. When I'd get home at 5 p.m, they would be there lighting up a cigarette, almost like they were waiting for me. I was finally at my wit's end and asked them if they'd actually lived here and whether they could verify that with my landlord. None of them answered, and two proceeded to walk down the alley, but one remained stone cold and standing his ground, continuing to smoke. I was upset and I repeated the question. "So, if you live here, can you verify this?" He stared at me with dark, cold eyes and put his cigarette out on my door, only to brush my shoulder as he left my property. Safe to say, I was unnerved after that interaction. I reached out to my boyfriend to let him know what had happened, and he relayed the message to our landlady. A few days had gone by since the last encounter, and there were no signs of those men. I actually felt pretty good about myself. I had taken for granted being able to walk up to my apartment steps without being fearful. I had made it to Friday and decided to treat myself to a few drinks with local friends. I had become diligent about locking windows and doors, and being next to an alley made me feel extra vulnerable, especially after my confrontation with the porch creeps. Needless to say, I was on edge. My night out was enjoyable, and after a few beers, I decided it was time to go home. Thankfully, a friend of mine insisted on making sure I got into my house safely. After all, he was the one who had assisted me on a few occasions before. I arrived home and he walked me to my door. But upon arrival, my door was covered in ash and the porch floor in cigarette butts, with the aroma of freshly smoked cigarettes in the air. He could see the fear on my face and offered to sleep on the couch to keep watch, but I told him I would be fine on my own. I stayed up a bit longer, double-checking locks and pulling my blinds down. After about 20 minutes, I retreated to my bedroom, which faced my front door, being sure to keep the door ajar so that my Rhodesian Ridgeback could be aware of anything happening outside. After a bit of Netflix, I finally dozed off until around 3 a.m, when I awoke to my dog growling. I was petrified. Something in me knew tonight was the night he or they would be back. I got out of my bed slowly, trying to make as little sound as possible, and I peered out my door. I saw a single hand on the stained glass window and a pair of eyes peering in. He was back. I had unfortunately left my kitchen lamp on, exposing my house to the outside world, and knew that if he saw me, it was game on. Slowly and quietly, I made my way to the lamp and turned it off so he could no longer see me, which ensued terror. The man, appearing to be shirtless and yelling slurs at me, began pounding on my door and demanding entrance. I retreated to my room and called 911, who told me to stay low, avoid interaction, and to stay on the line until the officers arrived. I couldn't stand to watch him punching the window, because I knew it was a race between him and the officers for whoever got to me first. Finally, there was a loud crash. I peered through the door crack to see that he had upgraded from a hand to a brick, causing the glass to begin cracking. I remember it all so vividly. It had been almost 10 minutes on the phone with dispatch at this point, with officers 10 minutes away from my home. After a few more brick throws, I watched him scale the porch to my window, continuing to try and obliterate the glass, leaving the cracks in his wake. Then there was silence. I once again looked toward my front door to see him looking back at me, cigarette in hand, until the cops arrived. I was told to wait for a knock on my door, which finally came, to tell me it was safe to come out. I made it outside just as they were putting him in the back of the vehicle, when he yelled, "Bye, Pete." Now this absolutely shook me to my core. Only my family referred to me as that, and they were thousands of miles away. I realized he had been watching, listening and waiting. He probably knew my boyfriend was gone, and most likely heard me refuse to have my friend stay here. I watched the vehicle drive away and called whoever I could get a hold of at that hour. Come morning, my mum finally called me back and told me to get in touch with officers and press charges, something that had entirely slipped my mind during the mayhem. I called them back and asked them to get the paperwork, only to be told he was put in the hospital but had run off before properly identifying him. Needless to say, I moved shortly thereafter, and my boyfriend found another job locally. To the cops who were absolutely no help, good riddance, and to the man who was after me for God knows what, let's not meet again. Now, I love my mum, but damn does she have bad judgment when it comes to men. To get right into it, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, my mum started dating this guy, which for the sake of this story we'll call Rob, and his son who we'll call Tim. We, my mum, older sister and I, had moved in with them once school was about to start. All was good for about 2 years, other than some minor incidents and his toxic masculinity. He constantly felt the need to put everyone else down and be aggressive all the time, but I'm not really sure what made him snap one day. It could have been the fact that he'd been drinking, but his bad behaviour began to seep into times when he was sober. He would grow very mean towards his son Tim, basically overnight. He wasn't so much physically abusive to me or my sister as he was to Tim. It was more mental abuse towards us girls, but we never did find out why he switched up like that so fast. When I had first witnessed his abusive ways, I became very scared very fast, and he knew it, and he liked it. This went on for months and months. Once my mum found out about the abuse towards us kids, straight away he was aware that she wasn't going to put up with it. Rob didn't like that at all. He threw a hissy fit, just like a baby, kicking things and yelling at her to not go whilst crying. At one point he had even punched a hole in the wall of the house where we were renting. I don't remember most of that day or what was said. I just knew we were finally going to leave, and after we'd moved out officially, it was instant relief. Though I did feel bad for Tim, having to be stuck with that man by himself. After the official break-off of everything, this is when he started following us. At first it was just when we were at the store. We'd see him in one aisle, then the next, and the next. Even when we would walk way across the store, he would always just show up. And it definitely didn't feel like a coincidence. This went on for the next couple of weeks, consecutively when going out. We would even go back and forth between stores, grocery shopping one week, and the other store the next time. Once we'd stopped seeing him, my mum said she felt less anxious about leaving the house, until about a week later. That's when the endless amount of phone calls and emails started. She'd blocked his number, but he'd just call back with a different one, or email with a new address. This went on for months and months, until it just got beyond creepy. By this time I was in basketball in elementary, so one game night we would get home as it just got dark. And one particular night we had left the game a bit later than usual, making it pretty dark when we arrived home. And when I tell you that this man was at our house 2 months after their split, my heart fell to the floor when I saw his car there and seeing him on our porch, looking in the windows. I could tell my mum was trying to be calm because she didn't want me to be scared, so she just kept driving and hoped he hadn't seen us, and thankfully he hadn't. We drove around the surrounding blocks a couple of times before trying to go back home, and when we did, he thankfully wasn't there. My mum didn't feel safe just going in knowing he had violent tendencies, especially when he's angry. So to be on the safe side, she called a friend to walk through the house with us, just to have a third person there. Thankfully, the house was all good, and he was nowhere to be found. A similar type of situation had happened another time, except I was home alone on this occasion. I was sick from school and my mum had to work, along with my sister, but again he was looking through the windows like a complete creep. My adrenaline had risen so much one time that I saw him, that my 10-year-old self, knowing I couldn't do much, nor could I move from behind the front door without him seeing me, started pounding on the front door, which scared him off pretty fast, thankfully. I guess he wasn't expecting anyone to be home, although I'm not really sure what he was looking for or who he was looking for. After this incident, I'd only seen him at the store a couple of times, in each and every aisle once again. Weirdly enough though, after a couple more weird calls and voicemails, it all suddenly stopped, and we never saw him or heard from him again. I am a 17-year-old male living a relatively quiet life in rural northern Montana. I don't party a lot or do stupid stuff, but I do love driving in the mountains. Little did I know this could have cost me my life. It was August of this year, and I was enjoying some free time on my day off of work, so I decided to take a drive in the mountains north of Kalispell. For context, I drive an old red Nissan Frontier that came straight out of the 90s, which has a very temperamental transmission. The drive there was uneventful. Typical reckless drivers, big diesels, and the northern highway dreariness. It was a foggy, cold and rainy day, so I figured nobody would be in the mountains at this time, and I would be all alone up there. When I pulled off the main road onto the mountainous dirt road, I felt normal, like nothing was wrong other than my transmission. I drove up the road for about 2 hours until I hit a peak and got out to take some pictures, something I usually do for memories, and nothing was really out of the ordinary. It was just silent, other than the wind whistling through the trees and the rain. I was truly alone. Until I got the feeling. You know that feeling you get in your core when someone or something is watching you? I was just standing there motionless, listening to any noises that might alert me to someone's presence, but there was absolute stillness. I started to slowly walk back to my truck when I suddenly heard a loud boom, and a sound like you hear in those old Western movies. My fight or flight was instantly in 6th gear, and I sprinted back to my truck, started it up, and by the grace of God or some higher being, I was able to get it into first quickly and sped off. I was able to find a spot big enough and turned the truck around and got out of there as quickly as this little 4-banger could do back down the mountain road and onto the highway. I drove completely flat out down the highway to the nearest gas station when I stopped. I was absolutely petrified at this point because it wasn't hunting season. I didn't see or hear anyone else, and there was no way I could be mistaken for an animal. I got out to see if my truck was damaged at all, and lo and behold, there was a massive bullet hole. I'm going to guess it was a 7mm round-sized hole, and it was in the side of my truck. It went in by the rear fender and came out through the tailgate. I immediately called the county sheriff, but since there was no bullet or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Nothing else has really happened since then, and I haven't been back to that area. I'd like to preface this by saying I was young and drunk for the majority of this time in my life, so my bad decision-making, while annoying, was not out of pure ignorance. I was a 20-year-old female at an anime convention. My 21st birthday was coming up a month later, so my roommates decided to let me get drunk as long as I stayed in the room or left with someone I trusted. I was staying with a large group of people in one of the nicer hotel rooms there, and I had been to quite a lot of these conventions, and had never had any bad experience outside of a few cosplay creepers. The weekend went pretty normally, except I was drunk and my group was throwing small parties. On the night of a particularly not-so-fun one, I decided to drunkenly leave the room and go roam around the main lobby. That was when I met Stephen. I have no idea how old Stephen was, but he was at least an adult, and maybe a little older than me. We ran into each other at a manga table, and he mentioned how he loved the manga I was holding. I didn't really read manga. I just liked the artwork, but I still listened to him gush about the story for a few minutes, because whatever he was saying, he seemed nice enough. I didn't say much to him outside of, and, yeah, that sounds really cool. I thanked him for the info and walked away, and after an hour or so of roaming around, I decided to head back up to my room. Once there, I had thrown back 2 shots with my roomies and was laying on the couch when we got a knock on the door. The music and talking quietened down, as it was customary to shush when someone knocked, just in case of con security coming to shut down our party, and that's when my roommate who answered the door said, "Veronica, she's here, come on in." Followed by silence, and then my roommate calling my name and telling me, "Someone's here for you." Now 2 things drunk me didn't think about. Firstly, the fact that I didn't tell Stephen my name. Our interaction lasted 5 minutes max, and I gave no information to him. And secondly, my name is more complicated and hard to pronounce. Maybe I assumed he just described me, and my roommate knew who he was talking about, but I didn't give him my room number either. We were several floors up in the suites area, so you'd have to take a different elevator to get to the room. I definitely didn't think about that though. I walked to the door and Stephen was smiling. He asked me to go for a walk with him. I drunkenly said yes. I mean, he's just an awkward anime dude who just wants to be a friend to hang out with. As we were walking, he was talking to me about he recently watched an anime where the protagonist wouldn't stop killing the girl he liked. I've since googled that anime plot and haven't been able to find one similar to what he was talking about, outside of some yandere anime. I got a little creeped out by this, as the hall was empty and we were walking with no plan of where we were going. He then began to talk about his favourite serial killers and how he was a huge crime junkie and that he followed a lot of cases. A big red flag went off in my head at this point, and I decided it was time to try and get back to my room. But then he stopped walking, stared at me and said, "I know a really cool spot we can go. If you take the staff elevator, you can go all the way to the top of the hotel. It's really pretty." He was suddenly breathing a little oddly, and his hands were shaking. I said no. I had some sense left in my head. He then grabbed my arm as hard as he could and started pulling me and yanking me towards the staff doors. I pulled back, asking him to stop, and he told me to just be quiet. I thankfully yanked free of him and started running, and he chased after me, telling me to stop. I was nearly in tears, and wondering why the hallways were so empty at one of the most crowded cons I've ever been to. I finally ran into a group of girls, and they saw the fear on my face, and immediately pulled me into their group, asking me about my hair and makeup, and wrapping their arms around me. I was crying, telling them what was happening, and when I looked back, Stephen was gone. Thankfully I didn't see him for the rest of the con, but I stopped being so friendly at cons because of him. Be prepared to read things that are not my finest moments. When I was a freshman in high school, I was dealing with a lot of things that ultimately caused poor life decisions. I started high school when I was young, barely 13 years old. I'm a female and now a junior, and there was this guy that I didn't think anything about, since I wasn't focused on people that much. I didn't really care about anyone, except the 2 friends I had in the classes I had with him. He was 17 at the time, and yes, in those classes the grade levels were mixed. Nothing ever struck me as odd about him, since I rarely paid attention, until one day in biology, I looked up from my paper and saw him taking pictures of me. I was creeped out, but didn't say anything, in case I was wrong. Days later he found my Instagram and kept texting me, which I obviously never responded to, and if I did, I would be very dry and just leave him on scene. Then one day in the middle of class, I got a text from a random number saying, "Hey Sarah," followed by various emojis that included hearts. I immediately knew it was him, as earlier he was asking for my number, which I declined to give him. I immediately went to the 2 friends in that class to yell at them for telling him, to which they replied, "We never gave him your number." They even showed me their phones and let me go through them. Their messages with him had no number of mine, and it was never mentioned, despite his numerous texts asking them for it. I never answered him and desperately tried to avoid him, until one day on Instagram I got a text from him saying, "You're so pretty." To which I replied that I wasn't. Then he spammed me with pictures that he had taken of me. That wasn't even the creepiest part. There were around 50+ pictures of me, ranging from classes, in and around the school campus, and even outside of school, like near the bus stop or waiting for a friend at the quad to go somewhere. There was even some of me playing soccer with friends on the football field. Obviously I left him on scene, blocked him, and avoided him more than ever, even to the point that I started skipping class, and when I did go, I told the teacher what was going on while shaking with fear. She allowed me to go to the dean of the school, where I showed them everything I had on my phone, and even gave them the number I was getting the messages from. It's now been 2 years since all of this, and I'm a junior, and he's made new accounts on everything, and he's probably got a new number. He's been trying to follow me and message me for weeks now, and I keep blocking him, only for him to create new accounts. I'm honestly glad that we're all in quarantine, as I would probably be too nervous to go to class or even school. The strange thing is, it's still not known how he got my number in the first place, as the only 2 people who had it never gave it to him, and I'm 100% sure that he was following me around the school, even after I told the dean. Now I would like to share with you one of the scariest photo shoots of my entire whole life. You can treat this as a cautionary tale. Last night my model and I finally got to do a photo shoot we'd been wanting to do for a long time. The theme I wanted was a dead girl in your headlights at night type of shoot. It was 9 p.m, but it was already pitch black, so we found some deserted road in the middle of nowhere and started taking pictures. We'd gotten through 2 outfit changes, and were starting to change into the 3rd. All of a sudden we saw a car in the forest. There was a dirt road to the left of us, and apparently he'd gotten stuck in the mud and couldn't get out. We were waiting for him to get unstuck to carry on with the shoot, but he was taking so long that we just decided to get on with it. She was still trying to change into the 3rd outfit, as it's not so easy in a dark, small car. So I decided to go outside and get my settings ready so she wouldn't need to stand in the cold rain for too long. But as soon as I got out, this dude all of a sudden became unstuck and sped onto the road that we were parked on. I immediately hopped into our car and locked the doors and just sat there, feeling a little scared. He could have very well just been stuck in the mud and just got out, but something didn't feel right. He pulled up to the driver's window seat where my model sat, which was about 10 centimeters from her car, and he almost broke off her side mirror with his, and he just looked into our car. Now we had this big butcher knife prop for photos, so she pulled it from her bag and showed it to him. That's when he sped off. We promptly left, deciding to go in the opposite direction, just in case he'd decided to block the road or something. But unfortunately we met a dead end and had to go back. As we'd gotten to the spot where the incident had occurred, this creep was there, in the same spot as before, pretending to be stuck again. We sped right past him and called the police, because we thought he could just be waiting for somebody to go up to him and offer help, and then harm them. So guys, please be safe. Pay attention to your surroundings, and maybe don't go taking photos on deserted roads. This happened to me and my friends 20 years ago when I was 18. I live in Tennessee, and we have a place here that we call Little Egypt. It's a swimming hole that my friends and I had been to a million times, specifically at night. It was the middle of summer and the county fair was in town. My twin sister and I, and 2 of our friends, went and hung out there, like teenagers do, when we ran into our mum, stepdad and little sister. We told our mum that we were going to our hangout spot, Little Egypt, to goof off as we had done a lot that summer. And I remember that she specifically told me and my twin sister not to go down there that late, because anything could happen. We were 18 at the time, and of course you don't listen to your parents much at that age. We shrugged it off and told her she was crazy, and nothing would happen to us. We waited until around midnight and decided to go to the swimming hole. It was me and my friend Lisa in one car, and my twin sister and our friend Heather in another. Now when you get to the swimming hole, it's within the woods, probably about 10 minutes from any civilization, and there's nowhere to turn around unless you go back up to the road. We parked up and got out of our cars. We were collecting our things, like flashlights, etc., and started to walk towards the car my sister was standing by. All of a sudden we could hear some sticks breaking. I looked at my sister and whispered, "Did you hear that?" "Yes," she whispered back. We thought that it was maybe Lisa messing with us, so we told her to stop trying to scare us, as it wasn't funny in the slightest. Then she says, "I didn't do anything." Then straight away we could hear a lot of sticks breaking. My sister and Heather jumped back into their car, and I ran to Lisa's car, barely jumping in time. She had automatic seatbelts. It nearly broke my shoulder getting in so fast. I don't know how we got the cars turned around in that little space, but we did it. And as we did do it, we then noticed 6 guys dressed in black, from head to toe with masks on, jump out from the woods and to where we were parked. They had baseball bats and were chasing after us. About 3 days later, curious as to what that was all about, we went back down there. When we arrived, there was police tape everywhere, and some other people were there too. We asked them what had happened, and they'd said that some guy had gotten beaten to death 3 nights ago, the very same night that the 6 guys had jumped out on us. Thank God we'd gotten away, but my heart breaks for that guy who lost his life that night.